Hello scientists! Today we're going to be doing an introduction to science. We're going to start with a scientific method. We're also going to learn the definition of science and some important components of an experiment. So the first thing, what exactly is science? Science is the process that uses observation and investigation to gain knowledge about events in nature. Especially earth science, we're going to be going outside, we're going to be exploring, designing experiments, figuring things out, figuring out how to improve things, how our earth and our world works together. The scientific method is kind of an outline to help us. It's an organized set of investigation procedures or steps used by scientists, which we're going to be today, this year, all the time. We're going to think like a scientist and actually become a scientist. The first step of the scientific method is to form a hypothesis. A hypothesis is an educated guess, but the most important part of a hypothesis is that it must be testable. It must be something that you can go out and figure it out some way, design an experiment to do something. Which brings us to our next step, which is design an experiment. This is an organized procedure for testing your hypothesis. So a hypothesis needs to be in a statement form, saying what's going to be tested, how the experiment's going to work, and how are you going to prove what you're wondering. The next, there needs to be a control group. So there's a standard for comparison. For example, if we were testing to see, maybe my hypothesis was that plants grow better if they listen to classical music. So my control group would be just a regular plant that's not going to listen to music or anything like that. And that's the plant we're going to be comparing to the plant that we're going to play classical music with. Okay, a constant are factors that don't vary in an experiment. So this would be no matter what, both plants are going to be in the same sunlight. They're going to be planted at the same time. They're going to receive the same amount of water. Those are our constants. And our independent variable. So independent, it's not stuck down. That's what I think of. It's by itself. That's the factor that's adjusted in the experiment. So in this case, one plant would receive music and the other plant would not receive music. So we're going to test to see if it grows better with or without classical music. The dependent variables are factors where the value depends on the independent variable. So kind of the opposite of independent variable, dependent variables don't change. Okay, you depend on them. Okay, the very last thing we're going to talk about today is scientific law versus scientific theory. Scientific law is the rule of nature that sums up related observations to describe a pattern in nature. For example, Newton's law of gravity. Okay, this explains things in nature. For example, why apples fall off of trees. Okay, that's a scientific law. When an apple breaks off a tree, it will fall. Okay, whenever an object is in nature, gravity always acts on it. When we stand on this earth, gravity is acting on us at all times. It's a scientific law. That's just the way it is. Scientific theory is an explanation based on experiments, most logical explanation. Okay, for example, the black hole theory. Okay, you could perform an experiment that would prove the existence of black holes, or that's how our universe came to be. But we're not positive. We might have came up with the answer through an experiment, and there was some data that might lead us to think that that's the way things were. So it's not absolutely positive, but we have performed some experiments and found some information that explains that. I would like you to read in your textbook. The first section is going to help you explain some of this. Section 1, What is Science? It starts on page 6 and goes to page 12. There will be a short quiz on Tuesday. I'm going to tell you the questions right now. First, there will be a matching between the definitions of hypothesis, control, dependent variable, experiment, constant, and independent variable. On one side it's going to have those words, and on the right side it's going to have something to match to that, their definitions. And then you're going to have to put the steps of the scientific method in correct order using steps 1 through 7. The different steps are gather and analyze data, ask a question, research, conclusion, form hypothesis, design experiment, and share results. I didn't go quite that deep in my explanation, but the textbook will. Good luck.